Before I call the member for Dawson, I remind the House that this is the honourable member's first speech, and I ask the House to extend to him the usual courtesies. The member for Dawson.
Mr Speaker, I stand here in this chamber today in the knowledge that I am but one man amongst many who have been elected by their peers to serve their community and their nation. I stand here as but one man, aware that many others have served the Dawson electorate before me. I wish to acknowledge the previous member, James Bidgood, as well as the previous two National Party members, Deanne Kelly and Ray Braithwaite, both of whom assisted me in my campaign. I stand here as but one man, very much aware of the political greats, both past and present, who have sat or who sit in this place. The thought of being a minnow in a very big pond does spring to mind. I stand here as but one man who feels the enormous responsibility of representing the 94,533 electors in the seat of Dawson. Mr Speaker, the mighty electorate of Dawson stretches from the powerhouse city of Mackay through the idyllic Whitsundays, the beachside town of Bowen, the bountiful Burdekin, which is one of the finest sugar-growing areas in this nation, north to the southern suburbs of Townsville, including Wallaroo, Anunba, Adalia and Annandale. The industries that make up this mighty electorate include, of course, sugar, but also tourism, horticulture, fishing, and importantly, industry serving the central Queensland mining sector. The Dawson electorate is also home to many serving Australian Defence Force personnel. Mr Speaker, with all due respect to members present, the needs and concerns of the people of Dawson are very different to the needs and concerns of those in capital cities. Whether it be in Mackay, Townsville or in any of the towns adjoining the Bruce Highway, the poor state of our road network is a major concern. In Mackay, there is a desperate need for action when it comes to roads. Firstly, we need a solid commitment from the government to the important Mackay Ring Road project. During the election campaign, the Liberal National Coalition committed to kickstarting this project, but all the government has done is promise yet another study, this one at a cost of $10 million. The Ring Road will not only alleviate the growing traffic congestion problems for Northside residents, but it will link the Port of Mackay to the thriving industrial precinct of Paget and to the gateway to the Bowen Basin mines, the Peak Downs Highway. As someone who served on the Mackay Council for 6 years, I also want to put on record the need for greater funding for local roads by both state and federal governments. Councils and ratepayers in growing regional centres like Mackay are literally at breaking point, trying to keep up with the skyrocketing costs associated with building new roads and effectively maintaining old ones. The federal government is the only level of government that can give these communities what they need: access to an ongoing revenue stream that recognises the growing pains that they are going through. Along with the road network issues in Mackay, there is a dire need for increased funding for a range of problem areas on the Bruce Highway. From the need for a new Burdekin Bridge to a 4-lane duplication of Van Tassel Street to Flinders Highway in Townsville, increasing overtaking lanes and floodproofing sections near Proserpine and Bowen, there is about $1 billion worth of immediate work needed on the Bruce from St Lawrence North, most of which is not in the government's forward planning. Health is another key area where we are being let down badly by Labor. In Mackay, we have an appalling situation where this government weakened our rural rating, which attracts relocation funding for GPs and incentive payments for GPs and registrars. Since the middle of this year, Townsville, Cairns and Rockhampton are all classified as more remote than Mackay, and as a result attract greater funding for GPs. In fact, Mackay is now classified on the same footing as some Brisbane suburbs. Given Labor's penchant for quick fixes, here's one that can be done very quickly. Put Mackay's rural rating back to 3, so we can effectively compete with other regional centres for new GPs without having one hand tied behind our back. There is a gaping hole in Mackay's health network which must be mentioned. I refer to the desperate need for a Headspace youth mental health facility in Mackay. Mr Speaker, 2 years ago we had a spate of youth suicides in Mackay. In one 6-week period, 5 children committed suicide and several others attempted suicide. That problem has not gone away. I am told by frontline social workers and GPs in Mackay that every week there is a suicide attempt that someone has to be talked out of. It was a commitment of this Liberal National Coalition to deliver a Headspace centre for Mackay, but I say to the government, put politics aside on this issue. We need a Headspace centre urgently. Finally, in terms of needs for Dawson, there is a noticeable lack of adequate community and social infrastructure for growing populations. Whether it be an upgrade of the Mackay Showgrounds, the sporting grounds of the Mackay District Junior Soccer Club, the Whitsunday Motorsports Club's Raceway or the Whitsunday Sports Park, there is a clear need for more social infrastructure. If we're to make our regions truly livable, then we must have social and community infrastructure in place that makes those locations attractive to families and young professionals. Under the Coalition, such infrastructure was to be funded through a Better Regions program. I note that the new Minister for Regional Development has indicated that this type of funding won't be happening under his government, as he considers it pork barrelling. Well, if it's all right for Western Sydney to get multi-million-dollar Labor promises for soccer centres and hockey centres during election campaigns, then it's only right that through a proper process we give regional areas that miss out time and again a fair go and a fair share. And a fair go and a fair share is all regional Australia is asking for. And apart from that, government can get out of the way and let us manage our own futures. The Dawson electorate, with its support services for the mining sector, with its major resource port of Abbott Point, and with its resilient sugar industry, is the engine room of this nation's economy. The onus is then on the government, which reaps so much wealth from the efforts of mine workers, the farmers, the manufacturers, the businesses and the workers in the Dawson electorate, to give back a fair share in return for those efforts. I consider it my duty to hold the government to account on that front. Mr Speaker, I am well aware that it is also my duty to serve in the national interest. That duty will be aided by the values that I bring to this House, values formed by the 32 years of my life thus far. My mother was an immigrant to this country. Her family came to this country with nothing but hope. Both of my parents were disability pensioners for my childhood life, and we lived very humbly compared to many others. And all of this has given me a social justice conscience, but it's tempered with a strong belief that living in abject poverty or any form of poverty does not necessarily lead one to poor academic performance or into further poverty or into crime. My father and mother strived to escape the welfare trap as much as they could. In the bad old days, my father, in the gallery today, fronted the CES looking for work, and they told him, "No, you're on the pension for life, mate." He didn't accept that. He went on to become a taxi driver, the fastest in town actually, because he also went on to become a professional drag car racer. Today, my parents now own and run a successful small business, manufacturing and exporting motorsports car parts all over the world. I was raised a Catholic, but family finances meant I never went to a private school. Of the state schools that I did attend, Walkerston State School lies claim to a former member of this House, the Right Honourable Sir Arthur Fadden, leader of the Country Party and Prime Minister famously for 40 days and 40 nights. With some government support, I funded my own way through university, where I graduated with a degree in journalism of all things. Yes, I'm one of them. I attended Central Queensland University and was a proud residential student of Capricornia College. Amongst many other spirits, Capricornia College instilled me with a collegial spirit, which I will have for life. I've had a great uncle who ran for the Labor Party in the seat of Dawson in 1955. I've had a grandfather of Irish stock who worked on the docks in Glasgow, and my first jaw was on the floor of a printing factory. I myself have been a member of 2 unions, and so from all of this, I understand and respect the needs and aspirations of blue-collar working men and women in the seat of Dawson. On the other side of the family, my grandparents were cane farmers, and my father was also a Big Joe fan. Don't you worry about that. Over a decade ago, I joined the National Party, now the merged Liberal National Party. And while in this parliament I sit with the Parliamentary National Party, I consider myself now first and foremost a member of the Liberal National Party, a unified grassroots conservative force. This grassroots conservative force came into being through the tenacious efforts of dedicated men and women, but I will single out for praise here the father of the LNP, the Honourable Lawrence Springborg MP, Party President Bruce McIver, Deputy President Gary Spence, and not to forget the prior efforts of the member for Maranoa in his role as Party President. I echo the words of the leader of the Liberal National Coalition, who has written elsewhere that there could be a strong case for a merged party at the national level. That merged party, he said, would be liberal in its instinctive support for individuals and community solutions over government ones, and national in its determination that Australia should matter in the wider world. I only hope that one day, on a national level, we can achieve that vision and unite the Liberal and National parties into a force that will be for the greater benefit of this nation. Because right now, our nation groans under the weight of high taxation, government overspending, waste and debt, and a political and media elite-fostered culture of relativism and lack of responsibility that's often masked as tolerance and compassion. It's the conservative principles of those in the Liberal National Coalition that are needed to rectify the situation. It is the conservatism of those who sit on this side of the House, for now, that is the true philosophy in defence of individual rights. Conservatism, like libertarianism, seeks to defend individual choice and freedoms, but it also points to the consequences of that choice and freedom, be it success or be it failure. One of my political heroes, former US President Ronald Reagan, declared as much when he said, "If you analyse it, I believe the very heart and soul of conservatism is libertarianism. The basis of conservatism is a desire for less government interference or less centralised authority or more individual freedom." On the other hand, Labor, like all leftist movements, likes to pretend it's the champion of individual rights. But whether it be the mine worker, the cane grower, the small business owner or the mother in the working family, Labor is the party that has one hand picking their pockets while the other is boxing them in with regulation and red tape. Right now, a resident in the seat of Dawson could be subject to ambulance tax, land tax, stamp duties, local government rates, water rates, sewerage charges, waste levies, car registration fees, boat registration fees, cigarette excise, alcohol excise, fuel excise, capital gains tax, fringe benefits tax, super tax, GST, and last but not least, personal income tax. To me, the most hated of those taxes is the income tax. There are only a few things more detestable to me than someone mooching directly off your income, even if it's the state and it's supposedly for the common good. I believe income tax should go. To paraphrase Lennon, John Lennon that is, Mr Speaker, I know I may be a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. It's a big call, but I do dream of the day where we can put more money into workers' pockets by ending personal income tax, because we are taxed to the hilt. And Labor now wants to bring in 2 new taxes. The first is their mining tax that will put jobs and businesses throughout the Mackay region and North Queensland completely at risk. Those opposite may not know it, but when the global financial crisis first raised its ugly head, we felt it in Mackay. The mining industry hiccuped and people lost jobs. Mining service businesses stopped getting orders and small businesses across the community felt the pinch in a very big way. To us, It showed that the mining industry was not the unstoppable economic force that we had thought it was, and obviously that the government still thinks it is. But make no mistake, if the government rips billions out of the central Queensland mining sector through its mining tax, it will have an impact. This is somewhat personal for me. You see, my brother is a coal miner. My sister is the wife of a coal miner. My two nephews and my niece rely on their father's coal mining income to live. And if Labor causes the mining industry to hiccup, these are the kinds of people who will feel it. Miners, their wives, their husbands and their children. Working families in Dawson who have effectively been told by the Prime Minister that the only way that Australia can move forward is by a great big new tax that will hold them back. Then there's this carbon tax, the one that was twice denied during the election, the one that threatens to push up the price of everything, notably electricity, in the vain hope that we're going to cool the temperature of the globe. But whether you want income tax gone or you just want tax in general lowered, here's the difference between the Conservative and the Labor Socialist. We think that people should be able to make choices with their own money, while Labor dictates where they can spend it by taxing it and then giving it back to you if you're performing an activity that falls in line with their particular worldview. For instance, under Labor you could have got some of your tax money back if you wanted to supposedly help the environment by installing pink bats or foil insulation. And we know how that ended up. A better example. Labor gives generous subsidies to parents if their children are put into institutionalised childcare. But what about choice? Shouldn't parents and not governments be the experts in deciding the best day-to-day care for their children? Under Labor, childcare funding, along with paid parental leave, is more about promoting paid workforce participation than helping parents afford the care they really want for their children. Every family pays for childcare by giving up or giving away income, in particular the mothers who do their own childcare work unwaged. It is unfair that most Australian families miss out on childcare funding because they do not use daycare or other outsourced care. I believe childcare must be redefined to include parental and informal childcare, which is preferred by most families and it's cheaper for taxpayers to fund. We need to put parents 100% in control of the childcare budget by phasing in a single childcare payment that parents can use for family-based as well as formal childcare. But pinching people's pockets and using and abusing tax dollars are not the only way the Socialists try to dictate people's lives. We also have that other hand that I was talking about, the one boxing people in with red tape and regulation. In the electorate of Dawson, due to the actions of Queensland Labor in concert with the Greens, we have a classic example of red tape and regulation strangling local cane farmers. You see, despite the Australian Bureau of Statistics finding that 97% of farmers in the Great Barrier Reef catchment area were doing the right thing when it came to managing water runoff, state Labor brought in their draconian reef regulation rules. These rules require farmers to fill out piles and piles of paperwork, taking hours and hours each week, just to put some fertiliser on the paddock. It's typical of Labor. Despite knowing that the farmers are already doing the right thing, they seem to think that through red tape and paperwork they can better protect the environment. Well, quite frankly, farmers are sick and tired of being portrayed as environmental vandals. Mr Speaker, to the Conservative, property rights are sacred. This is because the ownership of private property is so intrinsically linked to freedom for the individual, which I talked about earlier. So as a Conservative, I sympathise greatly with the plight of landholders who've had their property rights effectively stolen from them without compensation under the guise of native vegetation management legislation or the like. To even think that a farmer's property rights have been restricted in the belief that locking up trees will somehow keep the climate from changing is disgraceful. But it's not the first disgraceful thing that's been done in the name of tackling so-called man-made climate change, and it won't be the last. Despite what the political and media elite tell us to think, the truth is the science on climate change is not settled. There are more than 700 scientists who have openly opposed the theory of man-made climate change in a report of the United States Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works. One of those scientists is a resident in the seat of Dawson, the respected geophysicist Professor Bob Carter. It seems to me that before we go down the track of removing people's property rights or introducing carbon taxes in the name of stopping man-made climate change, we should really work out what the facts are. That's why I believe it's high time that we had a Royal Commission to determine the scientific facts on the theory of man-made climate change. But while liberty from taxation, liberty of choice and liberty from regulation are all important, the liberty of life is fundamental to my conservatism. Whether it be the frail, the elderly, the terminally ill, or the child in the womb, life does matter. The left of politics promotes welfarism of all varieties under the guise of compassion. And through days for this cause and that cause and ribbons for this campaign and that campaign, the left champion this foul compassion between all and sundry, including complete strangers. But the relationship that exists between parents and children, or an adult child and a dying parent, should be inherently compassionate by its nature. And when we break that nexus, when we allow and encourage the removal of compassion from relationships that by their nature should be the most compassionate, then we are all the poorer for it. If we accept this as lawmakers, we accept a culture of death, and then we can no longer say that we are a compassionate society. Mr. Speaker, I stand here as but one man, a Conservative who is prepared to fight for the rights of the individual. I stand here as but one man ready to do his duty for his electorate. I stand here as but one man who knows the task ahead of him is mammoth. And I stand here as but one man, still feeling like a minnow in a big pond. But to quote my other political hero, the late great B.A. Santa Maria, even the minnow must do what he can. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I would like to dedicate my speech to my family and loved ones, my friends both here and departed, to Coalition MPs and Senators, to the LNP members and all supporters who assisted me during the election campaign, and most of all, to the people of Dawson who have put their faith in me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.